The times that you produce the best results in your life. How were you learning? How were you performing? Were you tightly scheduled or not? How were you learning? And how were you taking action, right? And in what role were you when you were taking action? So there's really two categories here. Is, do I produce results as a decision maker, or do I produce results as an advisor? Most importantly, it's not just about you feeling dialed in, it's about you having the most impact and results. Until you can manage yourself, you cannot manage others. It is non-negotiable to improve your communication weaknesses if you want to have a greater impact. If you want to produce more results in your life, your business, you must become a greater communicator. Welcome to another episode of the Bill Hauser Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how do you generate unstoppable energy and performance in your work, in whatever your career is. I'm going to go through some principles, kind of starting with a book that had a really big impact on my life called Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. This book really was a foundational element for me in discovering how happiness kind of works for me, especially in the workplace, and how to get into a flow of a high energy, extremely productive state in your work by, most importantly, embracing what I call your working style, right? So everybody learns differently, right? And everybody takes action differently, collaborates with others differently. There's an example at the beginning of this book that talks about some different presidents from the past. And some presidents who would give their speeches would need a completely typed out speech given to them before they made a speech to the American people, and it would need to be like the most detailed typed speech ever before they got up and spoke in front of the nation. And other presidents would just need a couple bullet points of what to hit on, and they would be able to just rehearse themselves through these bullet points, and then they would be able to speak in front of the entire nation, right? And this tiny example is an example I think all of us can apply to ourselves in terms of understanding how do we communicate and how do we learn, right? So the foundational principle of this book is what I believe it's what's called feedback analysis, right? Is looking at your life in 12 to 18 month chunks of time and studying your results versus your expectations, right? So anytime in life that you achieved breakthrough results in something and your expectation was to achieve those breakthrough results, or maybe your expectation was a little bit lower than those results and you kind of surprised yourself. Like an example is, let's say that we're building a sales team in your business and you expected that sales team to bring in $1 million in revenue, but it actually brought in $3 million in revenue, right? Well, that's a piece of feedback, right? And simultaneously, let's say you had another initiative in your business to make your business more profitable, like double your profits, right? And over those 12 to 18 months, you had an expectation of doubling your profits, but it didn't materialize. In fact, your profits went down, right? So when we look at history, we're able to see expectations that we had for a positive outcome in our life and then reality, right? And when we start studying reality in comparison to our expectations, we're able to understand where we're being delusional, some areas that maybe we suck, maybe we're not good at. We repetitively set goals around these areas, and we repetitively fail in those areas, right? And other areas where we continually set goals and we overachieve those areas, right? So this is a process, feedback analysis, where you're able to start understanding your gifts, right? The things that come naturally to you, the things that you can produce results in, right? And what's really important is oftentimes we work really hard on shoring up our weaknesses, which is also extremely important. I'll give you an example on this. Let's say, this is a funny example, but let's say every time that you communicate with people, midway through the communication, you just twitch out and you go, F you, right? You just start cursing out people, right? So let's say that you just have some weird weakness, which would really just be a quirk, right? And let's say you never shored that weakness up and you were a brilliant communicator other than the fact that midway through everything you communicate, you scream F you at people in the middle of your communication, right? Well, you could be an amazing communicator at the beginning, an amazing communicator at the end, but you have one weakness that everyone's going to focus on, and it's going to cancel out those strengths in that area, right? So if you don't shore up your weaknesses, oftentimes they can actually really harm your ability to fully leverage your strengths, right? But more importantly, that's a crazy example, but more importantly, we need to focus like 80% of our attention on doubling down on our strengths, and then 20% of our attention on shoring up our weaknesses and or hiring people and finding a team around us to pick up the slack where our weaknesses kind of show themselves. The second thing is, so that's kind of understanding your gifts. The second thing is understanding how you perform. And these are two completely different things, right? So let's say your gift is, new sales generation, right? You're really good at sales in your business. Or let's say that you're a lawyer and your gift is handling client work and, negotiating in court. Or let's say that you're a dentist and your real gift is blah, 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 right? Okay. Once you understand your gift, then the next step is to understand how you perform, right? So let's say one way that you are forced to perform, right? So let's say that your gift is sales, right? And you are forced to perform sales in a back-to-back, scheduled call after scheduled call after scheduled call after scheduled call, 8 scheduled calls in a row throughout the course of a day, right? And there is zero time to think, and you literally just have to show up, and then you have to do one sales call after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, and then 8 hours are done, you're done working, and that was your day, right? So is that how you perform? Do you perform best under a really tight schedule? Or do you perform better in sales with flexibility to exercise your sales gifts in a more flexible way with a less tight schedule, right? If you are, let's say, forced to be in a really high detail role, right, in your work, where you have to be on top of every micro detail over the sales process, right? So let's say that your gift is, again, sales, but the way that you're forced to perform is in a really high detail facet of the sales function of your business, meaning like you have to ensure that every sale was properly processed using like a technology system for the company, right? Yeah, you're kind of within your zone of genius in sales, but you're doing the wrong thing, right? Something that drains you in a way that drains you, right? So I really understood this for myself when I started experimenting with an overly scheduled work schedule versus a more open work schedule, right? So one big aspect of how you perform is how scheduled you are throughout the average work week, right? How tightly scheduled you are, right? If somebody does not perform well under a tight schedule, eventually a tight schedule is going to burn them out, right? Vice versa. There are plenty of people who perform great under tight schedules, but if you put them into an open format where nothing's ever scheduled, that's going to stress someone out who likes a clear-cut schedule every single day, right? So understanding your level of scheduling in terms of your performance, and are you a tight scheduler or are you an open scheduler, right? That is a huge aspect of performance that everyone needs to embrace. And another aspect of performance is, how do you learn, right? Now, what's really interesting is, like, it's kind of odd question. How do you learn, right? Well, some people learn by reading books. That's actually a very small percent of people. Other people learn by listening to presentations and listening to audiobooks, right? Other people learn by talking. Huh? Think about that. Like, I am actually a talk learner, right? I learn when I talk. So I absorb information by reading. I absorb information through audiobooks, right? But I learn through two mechanisms. I learn by talking and I learn by doing, right? So once I understood this about my learning style, I realized that books and audiobooks, for me, are strictly mechanisms for me to fuel myself with information, right? So that I can then learn better when I talk it out, or learn better when I do it, right? But for me, retentive learning, it's a new word, the learning retention for me happens when I talk it out and or when I do it, right? But the inputs that allow me to talk it out with more precision and do it with more precision are books, audiobooks, right? So you have visual learners, you have audible learners, you have tactical learners, people who learn by doing, right? And then you have vocal learners, people who have to talk it out to actually learn to clarify their thoughts, right? So understanding your learning style is one of the most important things in dialing in your performance, right? So my learning mechanism is typically I absorb information from a book, audiobook, or piece of information. That's step one for my learning style, right? Step two is then I clear my thoughts out by writing, right? I write out my thoughts. Then, once I've written out my thoughts, I like to talk out the thoughts to then kind of experiment and see whether or not these are the right thoughts in the right order and whether my writing makes any sense. And then I like to take action once I've clarified my thoughts and kind of stress tested them by venting them out, right? So I used to kind of take this a completely different way in my business, where instead, I thought, I trapped myself into this method of learning where I wouldn't map out my thoughts via writing. I wouldn't map them out via brainstorming first, and I would just start taking action. But I found out that it stressed me out, and oftentimes I was taking action on the wrong things because I wasn't slowing down to clarify my thoughts, right? And this is all a adaption mechanism, right? That Peter Drucker kind of talks about, and it's all through feedback analysis. So then the question is, like, the times that you produce the best results in your life, how were you learning? How were you performing? Were you tightly scheduled or not? How were you learning? And how were you taking action, right? And in what role were you when you were taking action, right? So, like, for me, another thing where I learned that, like, leadership worked well for me was when I was in school. I was in a band, right? And, like, naturally, I don't know why naturally, just for whatever reason, I was the lead singer of the band. And, myself and my buddy Clinton tended to be the guys who created the plan for the band and scheduled the shows and set goals for the band and everything, right? So it just felt natural for me to be in a situation where I was setting the goals and the direction of, the band, right? And that same thing kind of applied when I worked in school projects, right? Is like I was the person in school to take charge of every school project, and a little bit of the only child in me would occasionally I would just after I'd take charge of a project, if people weren't keeping up with my speed, I would just push them aside and say, hey, let me work some magic here and get the project to 80%, then I'm going to need your help, right? So I had no problem speaking my mind and taking leadership roles in school projects and my band. So that, when I went into business, for myself, like I was able to already have learned that from my past experiments, right? I think one of the biggest problems that people have is they don't, they never really reflect enough to understand the areas in which they perform the best, right? And if you never reflect in the areas in which you perform the best, there's really two categories here. Is, do I produce results as a decision maker, or do I produce results as an advisor, right? And the majority of the world produces results, 98% of the world produces results as an advisor. 2% of people on earth produce results as a decision maker. That's why there's less decision makers than advisors and people who help the decision makers, right? So understanding that working style. Now, if you are a decision maker type in an advisor role, you are going to feel extremely burned out. That's what happened to me when I was working at Chubb Insurance, which is the job I got out of school when I graduated college. I was working at a Fortune 500 company in a desk job, being told what to do every single day. And it was the worst experience of my life. It was terrible. I quit within 2 weeks of getting a, decent job after graduating school because, like, no, sorry, it ain't cutting it. I can't work, a job like that. My body literally rejected it, right? And I quit within 2 weeks of that, Chubb Insurance job. So that was trusting my body signals, my results. But if I look back to that insurance job, there was this one time where my manager, Todd, who I had when I was an intern there before they transitioned me to full time, there was this manager, Todd, amazing person. And him and I got along well. And this one time he gave me this creative project where I had open-endedness and I could invent my own solution, right? To this Excel, it was an Excel spreadsheet based problem I needed to do and solve all this math stuff. And just the fact that I was given autonomy to solve the problem in a way I felt was in my best decision-making purview, it was the best day of work I had at that place in my entire time of being there. Now, mind you, I quit after 2 weeks after 2 weeks of going full time, but I was interning there for 2 years and I hated every day of it. But this one day was a day that I actually loved because it was the one day I was given creative freedom and I was more in that decision maker role and I was given openness. I wasn't in meetings all day. I was able to be creative and flexible and work on a hard project for a long period of time without interruptions. And it worked well, right? So this is how feedback analysis works, right? Is you look over your life and you look at the times and periods of your life where time stopped, right? You look at the time of your life where you felt the most at peace, the most dialed in, but most importantly, it's not just about you feeling dialed in, it's about you having the most impact and results, right? This is what it means to manage oneself. That's what the whole theory of the book is that until you can manage yourself, you cannot manage others. Until you can embrace your working style, your learning style, your action style, until you can embrace this, it is impossible to be at high performance, right? The key of being in high performance is you just don't burn out, right? Oftentimes, it's so funny when I got started in business, people are always like, oh, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to burn yourself out. And quite frankly, for the first 2.5 years of running SMB team, that was true. And that was because when an SMB team was small, I had a really small team. And therefore, I had to do a lot of things myself that weren't within my pattern and felt unnatural to me and felt like I had to force it and I had to bite my tongue and just do it, right? Suck it up, right? And I kind of did burn out in those first 2.5 years when I started SMB team. I got overweight. I started overeating. I felt completely drained at the end of every Friday going into every weekend. I couldn't wait to veg out on weekends and completely detach myself from the work, right? Whereas now, it feels like a dance. It just feels like this natural flow where I've found my working style. I don't overly schedule myself. I'm in a full decision-making role. I have autonomy. I'm able to work on really challenging projects with long, unscheduled time periods I'm able to task switch. I'm able to like change my focus from one thing to a completely different thing throughout the week. And that just like feels natural to me, right? I always say like it's not ADD, it's AAD, right? I've been blessed with, attention abundance disorder. I don't call it deficit disorder. Attention abundance disorder means I have too much attention on too many exciting things all the time, right? That is awesome, right? And I can't believe I have a job, a responsibility that allows me to focus on a lot of different things all at the same time. Good luck being an entrepreneur if you don't have ADD, right? Because it literally requires attention on 1,500 things all at once and switching between those things constantly. So if you don't have ADD in some capacity or the ability to task switch and switch your attention to different things, you're not going to succeed as an entrepreneur, right? So this thing that some people call an ailment, is actually a gift for some roles. Like, find me one amazing creative artist, movie director that doesn't have what someone would call a mental illness, right? I mean, find me one. It doesn't exist, right? Like, and that's because it's not a mental illness. If someone is creating magical pieces of work and leveraging massive creativity, that's not an illness, that's a gift, right? Like, that's why I make videos before about the hypomanic edge, right? Like, Steve Jobs had hypomania. A lot of the world's greatest creatives and leaders have a form of hypomania. Hypomania is on the bipolar spectrum, right? So what is hypomania? It means that you have ups and downs. It's not like hallucination level bipolar disorder, which is bipolar 1, I think, which is where you actually like hallucinate and you have like true manic episodes where like your reality is entirely distorted, right? Hypomania is this middle world where you have floods of dopamine through periods of your life, and then you have floods, not floods, you have incremental release of stress hormones throughout your life. And all that means is there's periods of massive execution, i.e. dopamine being released, and you have periods of reflection where not as much dopamine is being released. It's, did cavemen get labeled as bipolar? Was that even an available label? I mean, or was it just, hey, Tim, I don't even think, cavemen had names, but, hoo-ha, really happy this week in morning, really sad at night. Like, no, there was no label for it, right? It was just like, that's Tim, or that's hoo-ha, right? So, like, now we've created this medical system that basically labels everything so that we can then prescribe medication based on the label, which has then created this whole, big pharma debacle, which hopefully RFK can help with. But, at the end of the day, these are all gifts. And if you don't learn to embrace them, then you're going to feel like you're in a cage and you're going to feel drained at the end of every week, right? So the goal is to take your God-given gifts and to allow those gifts to put yourself in a position so that those gifts have the highest likelihood of being expressed at the highest possible rate in a way that they produce the highest possible impact. That is the goal, right? And your body is the smartest freaking thing ever. Like, I just broke my hand, and unconsciously, okay, like my hand's pretty much healed now. It's been over 7 weeks since I broke it. Unconsciously, think about this. My bones were completely dislocated, okay? This bone, my ring finger bone was popping up, my pointer finger bone was popping up, and my pinky finger was completely dislocated. They put pins in my wrist for 5.5 weeks, pins in my hand to straighten out my bones. They take them out, and with no effort on my behalf. My entire hand is now healed. I'm able to do push-ups. I'm able to do pull-ups. I'm able to do bench press. In 5 weeks of having my hand literally shattered. That's how powerful the body is, right? Think about that. With no conscious involvement on my part, these bones mended themselves together, right, over 5 weeks of time. Were originally completely detached from each other, and in 5 weeks of time, with no conscious effort on my part, these bones completely healed, right? Like, imagine if you consciously had to, like if you ever broke a bone before or had an injury, imagine if you consciously had to juggle all of the things that went on. If you broke your hand like me, imagine how hard it would be to consciously juggle, all right, well, I've got to release the bone marrow stem cells into this section of the bone. Okay, and now I gotta release the soft callus bone healing. Okay, and now I have to trigger inflammation at this part of the hand to prevent mobility. Imagine if you had to juggle all of those things for 1, 2, 3 of your fingers all simultaneously every single day, even while you're sleeping, right? The amount of decisions that are made by our body every second, okay, literally exceed the amount of decisions that we make in our lifetime consciously. That's how powerful our body is. So much more powerful than the conscious mind, right? So, what I say this for is to tell us to listen to your body. Listen to your body. It's pretty damn smart, right? If you're doing something that's draining you, then change something. Communicate with someone, right? If something's draining you, speak out about it. Say, hey, this isn't working for me and this isn't working. Let's work on it together. Let's fix it, right? And over time, if you're communicative about these areas and you're working with people who are willing to work with you, right? You can eventually optimize your life to where there's very limited curveballs, there's very limited drainage during your weeks, right? Because the ultimate goal is at the end of the week, you want to have more energy than you had at the beginning of the week. That is the ultimate measurement that you are working within your method of work, your strengths, your learning style, your action style, right? If you are working within all of those styles, at the end of every week, you will have more energy, not less, right? And weekends will not become a must-have. I need detachment. I need balance. No, it's just like, oh, I'm going to do something else I love. Like, that's how it is for me. Like, when I, race dirt bikes and do extreme sports on weekends, it's like, I get to do what I love during the week, and I get to do some other stuff I love on weekends. But it's not an escape. It's not because I don't like what I do during the week. It's, man, I get to do this, and I get to do this. This is so fun, right? So that's what I mean by working in your ideal working style. So the ultimate goal for high performance is high energy, right? In order to have high performance, in order to perform, and my measurement of performance is results, right? It's so funny, like, so many people have, like, these different things of, like, what is a leader? What is a CEO, right? Or, a leader. A leader is someone who gets results, right? Like, just think about it with any sports team, right? What happens to the head coach if the team loses for season after season after season? They get fired, okay? Do some head coaches have different personality types than others? Damn right. I mean, look at Andy Reid, right? Like, Andy Reid was, coach of the Eagles for a while. Now he's the Chiefs. He has, like, all these Super Bowl titles. Is he some loud, rambunctious coach? No, right? Doesn't matter. He gets results. Like, who cares? There is no one-size-fits-all leadership style. Look at, Nick Sirianni and, the Lions head coach, Dan Campbell. If you watch football, a little bit louder, a little bit more motivational, a little bit more, kind of get under your skin types, right? Does that matter? Is there one right way if the team is winning, if you're getting results? So the bottom line is, the best leadership style for yourself, for your family, everyone needs to be better leaders in our family, myself included, right? I mean, the best leaders are the people who get the best results. Bottom line, end of day. So therefore, in order to perform, you must get results. And in order to perform, you must have high energy. You must be operating within your actual true self, your true gifts, your true learning style, right? So the next question to ask yourself is how do I communicate, right? How do I communicate? Because communication is going to be either the accelerator of your, success or the hindrance of your success. So it's so funny, like this, if you read examples when Jeff Bezos was in his heyday, CEO of Amazon, they may still do this. Jeff Bezos had this like requirement that when you started a meeting at Amazon, there had to be a written brief before the start of the meeting. And everyone would sit in an office room at the beginning of the meeting, and instead of talking, everyone would read the brief, the written brief, right? Because his belief was that clear thinking results in clear writing, right? So his communication style when he was making, affecting change would be to first have everyone read his thoughts, and then he can, spread this throughout the company where everyone had to do this at the beginning of meetings, right? That's because that was his most effective communication style, right? Was putting it all out in writing, right? That tends to be a method that I tend to gravitate to as well. Is, I may learn by first writing, then brainstorming, then doing, but then I actually go back to written word as my dominant communication style as a clarification mechanism of my thoughts. Then I like to communicate it verbally, right? So communication is literally either going to be the inhibitor of your success or the propellant of your success. And it's so funny, like, it's not just what your communication method is. This is the one area that you can't just embrace what you were born with, right? And the reason is because if you were born with sloppy communication habits, then you got to improve that, right? Like we said, you got to shore up your weaknesses. And one of the best areas that 100% of people should shore up their weaknesses is within the communication bucket. Because communication is the vehicle through which you communicate ideas and the vehicle through which change happens, right? So one thing I had to work on really hard for myself was tying tangible actions and outcomes to my ideas, right? My natural tendency when I would communicate would be to communicate a ton of things that needed to be improved, but with no clear actions tied to them, right? And this is still something that I fall into frequently because, quite frankly, it's really hard to go against your weaknesses, right? But, it's an area I put a lot of work into in terms of taking great ideas and then turning those great ideas into a clear, organized set of actions. And this has been a multi-year work in progress for myself to try and improve on this area. But oftentimes, the reason that people can't make it in a leadership role, can't grow their business, if you're owner of a business, or can't grow within their role in a company is point blank, they can't communicate well, right? I mean, it's just literally, you could have one person who's extremely talented and one person who's a little less talented but an excellent communicator, and person B is always going to be the leader of person A. Because talent is not enough to get the job done, right? You also have to be an excellent communicator to be able to affect change, right? So communication is a non-negotiable area of improvement for everyone, and everyone has weaknesses in communication. The question is, what are yours, and what are you going to do to shore them up? It's so funny because, like, oftentimes, we have 150 employees at our company now, and people have these brilliant ideas on ways that we can improve our company, right? And they almost get frustrated about these ideas because they're like, oh, I brought it up before. I said this before. It's like, but nothing was done. And the truth is this. Yeah, you probably did bring it up before. Yeah, you probably did think it before. And yeah, something wasn't done because you communicated it like shit. That's the bottom line, right? Because if you just say it in passing as a passive-aggressive statement, or you bring it up once, and you never really take the time to write out your thoughts clearly into an organized action plan with a key objective, 3 main actions, and the outcome of that objective, right? And you don't train yourself to communicate in this way, it's just not going to affect change. It's complaining. I mean, which is unfortunate because some people with the greatest ideas and who see things that can improve our business, and I'm sure many other businesses, they think they have all these amazing ideas, and they do. But what is it if you see something that's not working and you call it out, but nothing changes? What is that? I call that complaining. This isn't working. This isn't working. This isn't working. That's called complaining, right? So brilliant ideas that are positioned the wrong way turn into complaining, right? And the goal for us as leaders is to create an action-first culture, both within ourselves, our families. And I always tell my team, like, if you have a problem, bring it up, but don't make me aware of it without a proposed solution, right? And another thing is make sure it's the right problem. Because oftentimes people think they know what the problems are, but they don't look at any data. They just look at subjective gut feeling, right? And they don't actually validate their ideas with data, right? So in order to have great ideas, you have to have the right idea, and that idea has to be put into some method of communication through which it can be taken action on, right? Where outcomes can happen. So communication, how you communicate, is a critical piece of success. And if you have weaknesses in this area, it will be the limiter of your success. And therefore, it is non-negotiable to improve your communication weaknesses if you want to have a greater impact, if you want to produce more results in your life, your business. You must become a greater communicator. And as part of this, there's another skill within this, which is clear thinking, right? There's actually a book called this, Clear Thinking, which is a great read. Clear thinking is the actual secret to clear communication and to impactful communication. Some people say like motivation is less important than clarity. I completely agree. When you are clear on what you want, that is way better than being motivated about what you want, right? Because everyone can get motivated about something temporarily. But when you create crystal clarity around what you want or what you want to solve, the chance of something happening becomes exponentially higher, right? So clear thinking is a habit. And I'm just going to say this, 99% of people they do not have a God-given gift of clear thinking. I certainly didn't, right? So this is another area of shoring up your weaknesses so that you can perform at your best is how do you generate clear thinking, right? And your mechanism through which you generate clear thinking is going to be one of the most important pillars of your communication strategy. Because if you can't think clearly, if you can't clarify your own thoughts, you are not going to clarify other people's thoughts. You're just going to confuse them, right? And as my partner Andy always says, a confused mind always says no, right? That same thing happens in leadership, right? If you're confused, then the people you share that confusing idea with aren't going to take action on it. They're going to go, it's too confusing, it's too complicated for me. But if you can simplify your thinking into rank-ordered, priority list action steps as to what actually needs to happen as a result of the thinking and why, there's two parts of clear thinking, by the way, if you want to produce results in your life. Number one is clarity around what the problem is. Now, most people skip this, right? They completely skip clarity on what the problem is, right? So when people skip clarity on what the problem is, typically their solutions are not the right solution when you're not clear on what the problem is, right? If you first discipline yourself to get clear on what is the problem that I'm looking to solve and get so clear on that, spend 80% of your time on that, getting clear on what the problem is, then you only need to spend the remaining 20% of your time on the solution. Because when the problem is so clear, the solutions become like child's play. So easy to come up with solutions when the problem is clear. But if the problem is murky, not really clear, then we got to try 15 different solutions to see what actually solves this murky problem and to kind of learn what the problem really is, and that wastes everyone's time. So the key is like, what's the one solution that would solve the need for 1,800 different solutions, right? What's that one pinnacle linchpin solution? That comes from clarity of problem. So the two pillars of clear thinking is clear problem. You've clarified the problem as deeply as possible. Then we go to clear solution, right? And if you can kind of apply these two principles whenever you're communicating change, is this is what the problem is, spend 80% of your time there, then 20% of your time on the solution, you will have a much greater impact, right? And what's beautiful is once you get clear on the problem, then you could literally just stop there and then give it to members of your team, communicate it to others. And what do you think the members of your team, those you work with, people that you share a really clear problem with, what do you think they're going to do naturally? They're going to know what the solution is because you were clear about the problem, right? So oftentimes you don't even have to make the solution when you're clear about the problem. So these are some of the principles I'm going to be practicing this year to increase my performance, increase my energy, and to maintain my energy so that I'm staying within my working style. I'm not draining myself. I'm respecting the way that I learn. I'm respecting the way that I take action. I'm respecting the way that I communicate. But I'm also understanding my weakness areas in each of these parts, especially in the communication bucket, so that I'm able to create more change this year. So I hope that some of my reflections on this topic are things that you can implement for yourself. And yeah, always feel free to email me, bill@smbteam.com, if you have any thoughts on ways we can go into new topics on this podcast. And I'll see you in the next episode. Stay great.